So it makes sense to start by talking about site analysis and what site analysis is. During site analysis, information is gathered, synthesized, and applied to test the feasibility of a proposed construction project in architecture. Site analysis literature suggests that the process is quite normative. So the information is gathered by the architect, and once it's gathered, they kind of take the information and go on to the design. But the design literature suggests that architects start by forming design solutions, which are evaluated as information is gathered. So what happens during site analysis at the information gathering stage is quite interesting for both of those literatures. Decisions taken during site analysis are quite important. They affect up to 80% of environmental and operational costs of a building, as well as some of the mistakes discussed in the post-occupancy literature could potentially be tracked to site analysis. So, this study draws on dual processing theory, where there are two types of thinking, type 1, which is fast and intuitive, and type 2, which is slow and deliberate. And the way the two combine is that one generates ideas and the other either accepts them or thinks about alternative ones. So we have an understanding of individual use of intuition and that individuals use intuition. But design and site analysis and work made in architecture never really happens individually. There are different actors involved. There are architects, architectural assistants, there are clients, contractors, consultants, and there is collaboration. As well as collaboration, there is a process of outsourcing where information one person does not know, an architect doesn't know, they can rely on another person, more informed person, to supply them with that information. And this is skipping a little bit, but based on our findings, is not just information that can be outsourced, but potentially also decisions. So when someone's not sure about the decision, they can outsource a decision from another more informed individual. So those were my aims. They were to look if collaboration or outsourcing is more likely to lead to the use of deliberation or intuition. So for the purposes of the study, I interviewed 21 architects. The architects varied in their experience, the practice size that they worked for. Some were self-employed, some worked for really big companies, and some worked for very famous companies, often kind of shown in the magazines. They undertaken different types of work, and the data was collected online because it was during the pandemic. The data was analyzed based on inductive thematic analysis because I didn't think I would end up doing this work. It just emerged from the findings. So I'll speak about the findings next. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'll just talk about the most interesting ones. So the themes. The first theme is negotiation, which arguably is dependent on deliberation in practice because it involves the development of arguments, persuasion, hypothetical thinking. So an example from the interviews is when an architect developed things to sweeten the deal for the planners. So in the UK, to be able to build something, you need approval from the planners. So this architect prepared things that they could offer them, such as they looked at the strategic plan for the area for the planners and what they want, and they said, oh, we're going to offer you more workplaces, we're going to make the area a little bit better. And they did all of that is for the planners to overlook certain site analysis issues, such as the right to light. The next theme is joint problem solving, and this happened when a mistake emerged. So I'll start with an example. This architect discussed how they were working on this project. It was a very famous company, and they were close to submitting for planning, and then they realized that the site had major level differences, had like a couple of meters level differences. So the ideas that they came up with would never be possible. The project was infeasible. So they came together as a joint team. it kind of made like a common goal that they started working towards. It was resolving that mistake and keeping as much of their initial design as they could possibly keep. So this common goal drove the team together and created like a focus for the deliberation to solve the issue. The next theme, which kind of is very similar to the previous theme, and is collaborative overlooking. And the way I started to understand this theme is that I looked at Keyningham characteristics of type 1, and he discusses how our intuition allows us to create stories from information we can see. And if we can see that information, we create the story, and if we're happy with the narrative, if we're happy with the story, then the quality and the quantity of evidence supporting that story doesn't really matter that much. It's more about the confidence that there is in the story, and the confidence kind of suggests whether we look for additional evidence or we don't. But what came from the interviews is that this sense of confidence is not just something that affects an individual. It can potentially like manifest itself in collaboration. So a form of collective confidence shared by the entire team. And there is an example on the board. So this architect said that we did a healthcare center, which was ready to be submitted for planning. So it was nearly completed. And the client sent the underground utilities information, which showed a high voltage electricity cable running right under the building. To divert that, it would cost £150,000, so the building suddenly became infeasible. And then I asked the architect, is there a reason why the client didn't send this information earlier on? And the architect replied that he thinks it was a mistake. I think that the architects, so he talks about himself, he talks about the team, he talks about the architectural existence, he talks about his boss, he talks about the meetings that he had every single day or weekly with other team members that kind of they regularly update, but they're potentially not working on that project. And then he continues to say that it wasn't just them, it was the project manager also, he forgot about it. And it wasn't until there was an external cue which reduced their feeling of rightness, and which was the planning submission, and it made them look for those additional evidence. So now I'll talk about the outsourcing themes, and this is very briefly. I'm going to talk about this theme where outsourcing information is stored elsewhere, and this happens when an expert develops a guide, and so in this case, in the case of what's on the board, they developed a spreadsheet where an architect in practice could just put occupancy or spatial areas, what they wanted, they could put the numbers in, and then the spreadsheet would give them the numbers back. And then they would put them into their design and continue doing. So they were outsourcing the expert that developed the guide, they were outsourcing that information, and they were applying in their own work, potentially outsourcing their understanding as well. Another theme is when architects were outsourcing to reduce complexity, and they were doing that. They were outsourcing site analysis to reduce effortful, time-consuming, and complex tasks. And potentially, based on the interviews, they were not just outsourcing site analysis tasks. They were also outsourcing experts' understanding of that site analysis. It's because when I started talking to the architects and the information that they received, they said that they didn't quite understand the numbers that came back. So those tasks of actually making that site analysis would potentially be quite effortful and quite difficult to make because they don't have the expertise to make it smoothly. But also, when I asked them if the information that they receive, if it changes the design, they said that it doesn't. But if they can't automatically do that, but they proceed to do the design and it doesn't change the design, there is some sort of a bit of a problematic thinking, that a problematic issue that arises. But another problem is the timing of those reports. So it's okay to outsource information and outsource stuff that you're going to put into the buildings, but in architecture it's a little bit more complicated because the costs come into. So you can only involve consultants when there is a certain degree of feasibility within the project, which allows you to go and spend that money on those consultants. And that degree of feasibility only comes once the project is to a certain degree designed. And then also when talking about those documents that they receive from the consultants, due to the cost, quite often it was a form of provision of documents rather than collaboration. So my next and final theme is how architects intuitively outsource decisions. So in a way, they substituted difficult questions such as what needs to be done for site analysis, and if what was done for site analysis was good enough, with easier questions such as what would planners want me to do? Or if the planners liked my proposal. So for example, if the proposal that they did received planning approval straight away, it indicated good analysis, and it justified the design process. An issue a little bit is that planners only tend to look at the areas rather than in the inside of the building, but as well, looking what you did previously and what received planning approval straight away can be a little bit problematic because projects change, buildings change, but as well the planners changed, what emerged in one of the interviews, and what they want can change. But this also indicates that what is made for site analysis is based on what planners want, rather than what needs to be done for site analysis. And kind of strange example that I want to give you is I asked all the architects to talk to me about site analysis, because like I said before, the literature is a bit confusing. And this architect talks to me about this beautiful building that they're designing. And then I asked her, is this building overshadowing all the neighboring buildings? And the architect replies to me, it is. But it's not really an issue. It's nothing we want to discuss. It doesn't really matter. This building will get built anyway because it already received planning approval. So in theory, it's suggesting that site analysis, the importance of site analysis diminishes once planning has been received, and there is more chance of relying on intuition when decisions are insignificant. And to bring it back to the conference theme, by studying site analysis, a related activity to design, we were able to further explore the solution-focused approach, specifically what happens at the information gathering stage. And we were also able to look at intuition beyond the individual use of intuition. So currently, the literature discusses how architects work and how they use expertise, how they work using pattern recognition, using consolidated knowledge, applying it straight away. But potentially, they can also take the default act of applying information without conscious reflection and without consolidated knowledge. So, to conclude and summarize and look through the aims, collaboration is likely to lead to deliberation, but we kind of knew that. We knew that it can, because of the discussions, etc., but it can also lead to the use of intuition through overlooking and potentially to mistakes and reworks. Outsourcing can also lead to the use of intuition, and that's for efficiency and reduced complexity. Outsourcing can lead to the use of deliberation, potentially, when it kind of turns into a common goal and form of collaboration. And it can also lead to the use of deliberation when outsourcing is followed by a low feeling of rightness. But for there to be a low feeling of rightness, architects need to have a certain understanding of the information. And this raises questions about the level of expertise required to gather and synthesize information. Thank you.